gentlemen. I'm glad to take your questions. Ms. Smith, Ms. Cormier.
Do you think that at this point our force levels in Vietnam will begin to level off the authorized strength, or do you think more troops may be needed in the future?
We have previously considered and approved the recommendations of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the force level. General Westmoreland discussed this at some length with me last night and this morning, and he anticipates no increase in that level. Mr. Smith?
President, we're getting close to the end of your 4th year in office, and you're being subjected to a great deal of personal criticism, ranging from a senator in your own party planning to run for the
I'm generally familiar with that.
The preacher in Williamsburg. And I wonder how you appraise this personally.
It's not a surprise. I'm aware that that has happened to the 35 men who preceded me. No public official, certainly not one that's been in public life 35 years as I have, would fail to expect criticism. There's a different type of criticism. There's a difference between constructive dissent and stormtrooper bullying and howling and taking the law into their own hands. I think that the president must expect that those in the other party will frequently find it necessary to find fault and to complain and to attempt to picture to the people that the president should be replaced. I think it's also true in all parties that there are divisions. We don't all think alike. If we did, one man would be doing all the thinking. So you have divisions in parties. We have perhaps more than our share sometimes, but I'm sure the Republicans think that too. So when you get into a political year with the help and advice and the abetting that the press can do, and the assistance that the opposing party can do, because it's their interest to try to destroy you in order to have a place for themselves, and you take the divisions in your own parties and they concentrate, then it does seem to mount up and at times occupy a great deal of public attention. But I don't think it's unusual for a president to be criticized. That seems to be one of the things that go with the job. And not many of us want to say, I failed, or I made a mistake, or we shouldn't have done that, or this shouldn't have happened. It's always easier to say that someone over there is wrong and the president is more or less a lightning rod. At least I have seen that in this country. I remember, to take one or two illustrations when President Truman very courageously and I think very wisely went into Korea. One of our pollsters dashed out with a poll, Dr. Gallup, and found that that position was approved about 81%. 6 months later, when the sacrifices were evident and the problems began to appear, the same pollster, talking to the same people, found that that had dropped from 81 to 26. Now, those things have happened in all of our crises, economic, domestic, international. And a president learns to expect them and learns to live with them. The important thing for every man who occupies this place is to search as best he can to get the right answer. Try to find out what's right and then do it without regard to polls or without regard to criticism. Mr. Sheriff?
A
good many Americans have said that a stop to the bombing is worth trying just to see if North Vietnam will respond. What is your view on this?
North Vietnam has responded. Their statement this week in the Hanoi newspaper in response to my statement from the Enterprise is very clear and very compelling, and I think should answer any person in this country that has ever felt that stopping the bombing alone would bring us to the negotiating table. Hanoi made it very clear in response to my appeal from the Enterprise that their position, in effect, was the same as it has always been, and the same as it was enunciated in Ho Chi Minh's letter to me, which Ho Chi Minh made public. And they are some hopeful people, and there's some naive people in this country, and there's some political people. But anyone that really wants to know what the position of North Vietnam is should read what the spokesman of North Vietnam says. And that's best summarized in Mr. Ho Chi Minh's letter to the President that he made public. That's on the record, that he's never changed. So all these hopes and dreams and idealistic people that go around just mislead and confuse and weaken our position. Mr. Boyd?
Do you have any evidence that the Viet Cong might be moving toward the position of wanting to negotiate separate from Hanoi? And if so, what would be your attitude toward negotiating with them?
I would prefer to handle our negotiations through our diplomatic channels with whomsoever we may negotiate. I don't think this is a place to do our negotiating, Mr. Boyd. And we are very anxious to find a solution that will bring an end to the war. And as we've stated so many times, we're ready to meet and discuss that with the officials of Hanoi, and the Viet Cong will have no problem in having their voice fully heard and considered. But I think that it would be better if we would wait until the opportunity develops along that line and then do it through our trained diplomats. Mr. Davis.
President, a minute ago you talked about the job of being president. This Wednesday you're going to complete 4 years in the office of the president, and I wonder if you could reflect for a moment on the presidency and what have been your greatest satisfactions and what are your disappointments?
Oh, I think we better do that a little later. I can't tell all the good things that have happened or the bad ones either in 4 years in a 30-minute press conference, and I'd be charged with filibustering. But I think that we primarily want to think of the future, not the past. It's been almost 2 centuries since our revolution and since we won our freedom. We've come a long ways during that period, but we have much farther to go, as you can see from our education and health and city statistics, farm statistics. As long as there are 4 people out of every 10 in the world that can't spell cat or can't write dog, we have much to do. I'm particularly proud of what we have done in education, from Head Start to adult education, where men and women past 70 are learning to read and write for the first time. I'm very pleased that, for instance, we have raised our contribution from the federal government to higher education from 16% to 24% in the last 4 years, while the states have remained practically static. We have made revolutionary strides in education, in health, in conservation, where we're probably taking in as much land into the public domain for the first time in years as we are letting out. We feel that we have brought a degree of stability in our international relations to this hemisphere through the Alliance for Progress and our meetings at Punta del Este. We think that we have, working with other nations, made material advances in helping underdeveloped nations in Africa. We're very pleased with what has come out of our meetings with the Germans and with the British in connection to our trilateral talks, what has come out of our Kennedy Round meetings, the several treaties that we have negotiated with the Soviet Union, and the one that we're working on so hard now, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We're happy that 9 million more people have good paying jobs today than had when I came into this office. But these are things of the past, and we should accept, and they're here, and we want to preserve them. But the important problems are ahead. What's the next century going to be like? What's the third century going to be like? As long as the ancient enemies are rampant in the world, illiteracy and ignorance and disease and poverty and war, there's much for government to do. And we're working on that now, and we'll be talking more to you about that, Mr. Davis, in the months ahead.
Mr. President.
Mr. Horner.
Mr. President, in view of your talks this week with General Westmoreland, Ambassador Bunker, and others, what is your present assessment of our progress and prospects in Vietnam?
Well, I will repeat to you their assessment because they are the ones that are in the best position to judge things locally, and I'll give you my evaluation of what they have said. First, I think every American heart should swell with pride at the competence and capacity of our leadership in Vietnam. I believe, and our allied people believe, that we have a superior leadership, and I think it's the best that the United States of America can produce in experience, in judgment, in training, in general competence. I've had 3 meetings with Ambassador Bunker and 3 with General Westmoreland. I had coffee with him at length this morning, just before I came here. Our American people like when we get in a contest of any kind, whether it's in a war or an election or in a football game or what it is, they want it decided and decided quickly and get in or get out, and they like for that curve to rise like this, and they like for the opposition to go down like this. Now that's not the kind of war we're fighting in Vietnam. We made our statement to the world of what we would do if we had communist aggression in that part of the world in 1954. We said we would stand with those people in the face of common danger. And the time came when we had to put up or shut up. And we put up, and we're there. And we don't march out and have a big battle each day in a guerrilla war. It's a new kind of war for us, so it doesn't move that fast. But summarizing what you... and trying to be fully responsive to your question in the time allotted, I think we're moving more like this. And I think they're moving more like this instead of straight up and straight down. We are making progress. We are pleased with the results that we're getting. We are inflicting greater losses than we're taking. We are very pleased with amidst the horrors of war, and more people have been killed trying to vote in South Vietnam than have been killed by bombs in North Vietnam, according to North Vietnam's own figures. But in the midst of all the horrors of war and guerrilla fighting in South Vietnam, we have had 5 elections in a period of a little over 14 months. There was great doubt whether we could have any. It took us from 1776, 1789, not 13 months, but 13 years to get a constitution with our Anglo-Saxon background and all the training we had. And to think that here in the midst of war, when the grenades are popping like firecrackers all around you, that 2/3 or 3/4 of the people would register and go vote and have 5 elections in 13 months, and through the democratic process select people at the local level, a constituent assembly, a House of Representatives, a Senate President, and a Vice President, that is encouraging. The fact that the population under free control has constantly risen, and that under communist control has constantly gone down, is a very encouraging sign. The improvement that has been made by the South Vietnamese themselves in putting in reforms, in announcing other programs, in improving their own army, is a matter of great satisfaction to Ambassador Bunker and to just General Westmoreland. We have a lot to do yet, A great many mistakes have been made. We take 2 steps forward and we slip back 1. It's not all perfect by any means. There are a good many days when we get a C- instead of an A+, but overall, we're making progress. We're satisfied with that progress. Our allies are pleased with that progress, and every country that I know in that area that is familiar with what's happening thinks it's absolutely essential that Uncle Sam keep her word and stay there until we can find an honorable peace. And if they have any doubts about it, Mr. Ho Chi Minh, who reads our papers and who listens to our radio and looks at our television, if he has any doubts about it, I want to disillusion him this morning, because we keep our commitments. Our people are going to support the men that are there, and the men there are going to bring us an honorable peace. Mr. Reynolds.
Mr. President, Hanoi may be interpreting the current public opinion polls to indicate that you will be replaced next year. Now, how should this affect the campaign in this country?
Well, I don't know how it'll affect the campaign in this country. I think that whatever interpretation Hanoi might make that would lead them to believe that Uncle Sam, whoever may be president, is going to pull out, and it'll be easier for them to make an inside deal with another president than will be the president, they'll make a serious misjudgment. Mr. Rather.
Are you going to run next year?
I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, as I've told you so many times, Mr. Rather.
Mr. President?
Mr. President, there are increasing statements from Capitol Hill that say your tax bill is dead for this session of Congress. Is there any plans on the part of your administration to try and revive this before Congress leaves? And secondly, if not, what plans might you have next year to avert this inflationary trend that we have been told will be coming?
We want very much to have a tax bill just as quickly as we can get it. We think that sound, prudent fiscal policy requires it. We're going to do everything that the President and the administration can do to get that tax bill. I would be less than frank if I didn't tell you that I have no indication whatever that Mr. Mills or Mr. Burns or the Ways and Means Committee is likely to report a tax bill before they adjourn. I feel that one of our failures in the administration has been our inability to convince the Congress of the wisdom of fiscal responsibility and the necessity of passing a tax bill not only for the effect it'll have on the inflationary developments, but the effect it'll have on the huge deficit that we are running. And I think one of the great mistakes that the Congress will make, that Mr. Ford and Mr. Mills that have taken this position, that they cannot have any tax bill now, I think they will live to rue the day when they made that decision, because it's a dangerous decision. It's an unwise decision. And I think that the people of America, none of whom want to pay taxes, any pollster can walk out and say, do you want to pay more tax? And of course you'll say, no, I don't want to pay tax. But if you ask him, do you want to have inflation? Do you want prices to increase 5 or 6%? Do you want a deficit of $30 or $35 billion? Do you want to spend 35 billion more than you're taking in? I think the average citizen say no. Here at the height of our prosperity, when our gross national product's going to run at 850 billion, when we look at the precedents of what we've done in past wars, in Korea, when President Truman asked for a tax increase, the people supported him, and they got up, not only the people, but the Congress. Now, this request's been before the Congress since last January. They've finished most of the appropriation bills. I read the story this morning. It looks like out of $145 billion, they'll roughly cut $1 billion but they'll cut several billion from revenue because of inaction, because people don't like to stand up and do the unpopular thing of assuming responsibility that men in public life are required to do sometimes. I know it doesn't add to your poll and your popularity to say we have to have additional taxes to fight this war abroad and fight the problems in our cities at home. But I think we can do it with the gross national product we have. I think we should do it And I think when the American people and the Congress get the full story, they will do it. Now, we have failed up to now to be able to convince them, but we're going to continue to try in every way that is proper.
Senator McCarthy says that he is considering opposing you in the presidential primaries because he believes it would be a healthy thing to debate Vietnam in the primaries for the party and both for the country, too. Do you agree with him, and what effect do you think this would have on your own candidacy?
Well, I don't know how I'm going to be after all this opposition develops so far as my state of health is concerned, but I'm very healthy today, and I guess that I don't know whether this criticism has contributed to my health, good health or not, but I don't know what Senator McCarthy is going to do. I'm not sure that he knows what he plans to do. I think we better just wait and see until there's something definite there and meet it when it's necessary. Ms. Hanchman?
Why do you think there's so much confusion and frustration and difference of opinion in this country about the war in Vietnam?
I think there's always been confusion and frustration and difference of opinion when there's a war going on. I think there was in the Revolutionary War when only about a third of the people thought that was a wise move, and a third of them were opposing it, and a third on the sideline. I think that is true when all New England came down to secede in Madison's administration, the War of 1812, and they stopped over in Baltimore, and they didn't quite make it because Andrew Jackson and the results of New Orleans came in, and they were having a party over there that night, and the next morning they came over and told the president that they wanted to congratulate him. They thought he'd been right all along, although they'd come from Boston to Baltimore in the secessionist move. I think that is true in the Mexican War when the Congress overwhelmingly voted to go in and later passed a resolution that had grave doubts about it, and some of the most bitter speeches made that couldn't be published. They were so bitter they had to hold up publication of them for 100 years. I don't need to remind you of what happened in the Civil War. People were here in the White House begging Lincoln to concede and to work out a deal with the Confederacy when word came to him of his victories. They told him that Pennsylvania was gone, that Illinois had no chance. Those pressures come to a president. I think you know what President Roosevelt went through. President Wilson in World War I, he had some senators from certain areas then that gave him very serious problems and until victory was assured. And I think now when you look back upon it, there are very few people that would think that Wilson or Roosevelt or Truman were in error. We're going to have this criticism. We're going to have this differences. No one likes war. All people love peace, but you can't have freedom, Ms. Hanchman, without defending it.
Mr. President, the foreign aid authorization has been cut back nearly a third from what you requested. What is the impact of this economy?
I think that at a time when the richest nation in the world is enjoying more prosperity than it's ever had before, and when we carefully tailor our request to the very minimum that we think is essential, the lowest request that we have had in years, and then Congress cuts it 33 1/3%, I think it's a mistake. I think it's a serious mistake. I think that when you consider that $1 billion that we're attempting to save there out of the $850 billion that we will produce, that we ought to reconsider that decision, because what we're doing with that money not only can give a great help to underdeveloped nations, but that in itself can prevent the things that cause war, where you're required to spend billions to win it. And I would rather have a little preventive medicine, and I think every dollar that we spend in our foreign assistance trying to help poor people help themselves is money well spent. I don't think we overdid it. I don't think we went too far, but I think the Congress has in the reductions it's made. Now, it's popular to go back home and to say, look what I did for you. I cut out all these foreign expenditures. But when the trouble develops, the people that are starving and the people that are ignorant and illiterate and disease and wars spring up, and we have to go in. we'll spend much more than we would if we had taken an ounce of prevention.
Mr. President.
Mr. Morgan.
Mr. President, some people on the air and in print accuse you of trying to label all criticism of your Vietnam policy as unpatriotic. Could you tell us whether you have guidelines in which you are enabled to separate conscientious dissent from irresponsible dissension?
No, I haven't called anyone unpatriotic. I haven't said anything that would indicate that. I think the wicked fleeth when no one pursueth sometimes. I do think that some people are irresponsible and make untrue statements and ought to be cautious and careful when they're dealing with a problem involving their men at the front. Now, there's a great deal of difference, as I said a moment ago, between criticism and difference and responsible dissent, all of which we insist on and all of which we protect, and stormtrooper bullying of throwing yourself down the road and smashing windows and rowdyism, and every time a person attempts to speak to try to drown him out. We believe very strongly in preserving the right to differ in this country and the right to dissent. And if I have done a good job of anything since I've been president, is to ensure that there are plenty of dissenters. And there's not a person in this press corps that can't write what he wants to write, and most of them do write what they want to write. I say want advisedly. And I want to protect that, and I think our Congress wants to protect it. But if I, by chance, should say, now, I'm not sure that you saw all the cables on this, and you're exactly right, let me explain the other side of it, I would hope that you wouldn't say I'm lambasting my critics, or that I am assailing someone. What I'm trying to do is to preserve my right to give the other side. I don't think one side ought to dominate the whole picture. So what I would say is, let's realize that we're in the midst of a war. Let's realize that there are 500,000 of our boys out there that are giving their life to win that war. Let's ask ourselves what it is we can do to help. And if you think that you can make a contribution to helping them by expressing your opinion and dissenting, then do it. But then if the Secretary of State starts to explain his viewpoint, don't send out instructions all over the country and say, when he starts to talk and says, Mr. Chairman, wrap your feet. And then when he comes to the end of the sentence, all of you do this. And the third sentence, all of you boo. I'm amazed at the press in this country who insists on the right to live by the First Amendment and to be protected by it, doesn't insist that these stormtrooper tactics live by the First Amendment too, and that they be wiped out. And I think the time's come when it would be good for all of us to take a new, fresh look at dissent, and we welcome responsible dissent, but there's a great deal of difference between responsible dissent and some of the things that are taking place in this country, which I consider to be extremely dangerous to our national interests, and I consider not very helpful to the men that are fighting the war for us. Now, everyone must make that judgment for himself. I've never said anyone was unpatriotic. I don't question these people's motives. I do question their judgment. I can't say that this dissent has contributed much to any victories we have had. I can't say that these various proposals that range from a senator to a county commissioner to a mayor of a city have really changed General Westmoreland's plan much, or Ambassador Bunker's proposal. The papers are filled with it every day. So I think you have to consider it for what you think it's worth and make your own judgment. And that's the theory of the First Amendment. And we don't stop the publication of any papers. We don't fine anyone for something they say. We just appeal to them to remember that they don't have the privilege at the moment of being out there fighting. And please count 10 before you say something that hurts instead of helps. We know that most people's intentions are good. We don't question their motives. We've never said they're unpatriotic, although they say some pretty ugly things about us. And people that live in glass houses shouldn't be too anxious to throw stones.
Mr. President, is your aim in Vietnam to win the war or to seek a compromise, negotiated solution?
I think that our aims in Vietnam have been very clear from the beginning. They're consistent with the CETO Treaty, with the Atlantic Charter, with the many, many statements that we have made to the Congress in connection with the Tonkin Gulf. The Secretary of State has made dozens and dozens of times, and I made it enough that I thought even all the preachers in the country had heard about it. That is, namely, to protect the security of the United States. And we think the security of the United States is definitely tied in with the security of Southeast Asia. And second, to resist aggression. And when we are party to a treaty that says we'll do it, then we carry it out. Now, I think that if you saw a little child in this room that was trying to waddle across the floor and some big bully came along and grabbed it by the hair and started stomping it, I think you'd do something about it. And I think that we thought we made a mistake when we saw Hitler moving across the landscape of Europe and the concessions that were made by the men carrying umbrellas at that time, and I think in retrospect we thought that was a mistake. So as a consequence, in 1954, under the leadership of President Eisenhower and Secretary Dulles, we had a CETO Treaty, and it was debated and it was considered and it was gone into very thoroughly by the Senate. And the men who presented that treaty then said, this is dangerous. The time may come when we have to put up or shut up. But we ought to serve notice in Asia now as we refused to serve notice in Europe a few years ago, that we will resist aggression, that we will stand against someone who seeks to gobble up little countries if those little countries call upon us for our help. So we did that. And that treaty, I didn't vote for it. I was in the hospital. Senator Kennedy didn't vote for it, the late president. He was in the hospital. Senator Dirksen didn't vote for it, but 82 senators did vote for it, and they knew what was in that treaty. And the time came when we had to decide whether we meant what we said when we said our security was tied into their security and that we would stand in unison in the face of common danger. Now, we're doing that. And we're doing it against whoever combines out there to promote aggression. We're going to do whatever we think is necessary to protect the security of South Vietnam and let those people determine for themselves what kind of a government they have. And we think they're moving along very quickly in that direction to developing a democratic procedure. Second, we're going to do whatever it is necessary to do to see that the aggressor does not succeed. And those are our purposes, those are our goals, and we're going to get a lot of advice to do this or do that, and we're going to consider it all. But for years, West Point's been turning out the best military men produced anywhere in the world. And for years, we have had in our foreign service trained special people, and we have in 110 capitals today the best brains we can select. And under our constitutional arrangements, the president must look to his Secretary of State, to his foreign policy, to his ambassadors, to the cables and views that they express, to his leaders like the Joint Chiefs of Staff and General Westmoreland and others, carefully consider everything they say and then do what he thinks is right. Now, that's not going to please a county commissioner or a mayor or a member of the legislature, or it never has in any war we've been in, been a favorite of the Senate. The leaders on the military committees, the leaders in other posts have frequently opposed. Champ Clark, the Speaker of the House, opposed the draft in Woodrow Wilson's administration. The chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee almost invariably, with the exception of Senator Vandenberg, has always found a great deal wrong with the executive in the field of foreign policy. There is a division there, and there is some frustration there. And those men express it. And they have a right to, and they have a duty to do it. But it's also the President's duty to look and see what substance they have presented, how much they've thought out, what information they have, how much knowledge they've received from General Westmoreland or Ambassador Bunker, whoever it is, how familiar they are with what's going on, and whether you really think you ought to follow their judgment or follow the judgment of the other people that you're doing. Now, I do that every day, and some days I have to say to our people, let's try this plan that Senator X has suggested. And we do. We're doing that with the United Nations resolution. We have tried several times to get the United Nations to play a part in trying to bring peace in Vietnam. Now, the Senate thinks that this is the way to do it, and more than 50 of them have signed a resolution. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee kind of had a big day yesterday. They reported 2 resolutions in one day. Now, I have my views about really what those resolutions will achieve. But I also have an obligation to seriously and carefully consider the judgments of the other branch of government, and we're going to do it. And even though we may have some doubts about what will be accomplished that they think may be accomplished, if it's a close question, well, we will bend to try to meet their views because we think that's important. We've already tried the United Nations before, but we may try it again because they have hopes and they believe that this is the answer. And we'll do everything that we can to make it the answer. And I don't want to hurt its chances by giving any predictions at this moment. But we'll consider the views that everyone suggests.
Thank you, Mr. President.